The big Qatar Airways plane, a Boeing 777, was preparing for a very long journey. It was flying from Riyadh, a city in Saudi Arabia, all the way to Sao Paulo, a big city in Brazil. This was a long flight lasting many hours. In first class, a man sat by the window wearing a simple hoodie, a cap, and headphones. He didn't look like the other first-class passengers, who were mostly dressed in expensive suits and fancy clothes. But this man wasn't just anyone. He was Neymar, the famous Brazilian football star. Neymar had spent many months playing football in Saudi Arabia, and now he was finally going back home. He had decided to keep a low profile. He didn't want any attention. No security guards. No assistants. No fancy jewelry. Just him, dressed simply, hoping to have a quiet flight. Next to him sat a Spanish businessman named Javier Montoya. Javier was about 50 years old and looked very different from Neymar. He was wearing an expensive suit, polished shoes, and a golden Rolex watch. He looked around first class, enjoying the luxury of the flight. But then, when he saw Neymar sitting next to him, he frowned. Javier didn't know who Neymar was. To him, Neymar just looked like a regular young man, too casually dressed for first class. Young people today, Javier muttered, shaking his head. He made sure to say it just loud enough for Neymar to hear. But Neymar didn't react. He was used to people making comments about him. He picked up his phone, put on his headphones, and started watching an old video of himself playing football at Santos, his childhood club in Brazil. The video showed him making a beautiful dribble past defenders, and he smiled slightly as he watched. Javier, feeling uncomfortable with Neymar sitting next to him, decided to start a conversation. But instead of being friendly, he wanted to be rude. "I bet you're one of those internet people," Javier said, crossing his arms. "One of those influencers who do nothing important but still make money." Neymar ignored him. He just kept watching his video, pretending not to hear. But Javier didn't stop. He leaned closer, trying to see Neymar's phone screen. "Football?" he scoffed. Of course, it had to be football. Young kids these days think kicking a ball is a real job. A flight attendant walked by, taking orders for drinks. Neymar asked for orange juice. Javier laughed. "Not even a glass of wine? What's wrong? Can't afford one?" The other first-class passengers started noticing the tension. Neymar remained calm, but the flight attendant recognized him right away. Her eyes widened slightly. She knew exactly who Neymar was. And she also knew that Javier would soon regret his words. The plane had been flying for about an hour now. The sky outside was dark as the aircraft moved steadily toward Brazil. First class was quiet, but the tension between Neymar and Javier was clear. Javier considered himself an important man. He loved feeling better than others. To him, a casually dressed young man drinking orange juice didn't belong in first class. He wanted to keep making Neymar feel small. "You really like that video, huh?" Javier said, pointing to Neymar's phone. Neymar nodded but still didn't say much. Javier smirked. "That player must be really good for you to watch so carefully." This time, Neymar looked at him and smiled slightly. He realized something. This man had no idea who he was. "Yes," Neymar said simply. "He's very good." Javier crossed his arms. "I bet you like those players who do fancy tricks but never win big games," he said. "Football today is full of those players." The flight attendant returned with the dinner menu. Neymar chose a simple meal, some chicken and rice. Javier, on the other hand, ordered the most expensive dish on the menu, along with a glass of fine wine. He glanced at Neymar's plate and chuckled. "Simple food too?" Javier said, shaking his head. "Did you win your ticket in some contest?" The flight attendant, who had been listening carefully, decided it was time to put an end to Javier's rude comments. She turned to Neymar and smiled. "Mr. Neymar, would you like anything else?" she asked politely. Silence. Javier's face changed instantly. His mouth dropped open. He blinked several times, staring at Neymar. "Wait, Neymar?" he whispered. Other passengers in first class started whispering. Some had already recognized Neymar but had chosen not to bother him. Now, Javier was the only one who hadn't realized who was sitting next to him. Javier swallowed hard. You're Neymar?" Neymar gave him a small smile. He picked up a piece of bread and casually took a bite. "Yes," he said calmly. "I am." Javier's face turned bright red. His hands trembled as he held his wine glass. His heart started racing. He had been making fun of Neymar without knowing who he was. I didn't know," Javier stammered. He suddenly felt very embarrassed. Neymar remained relaxed, watching him. "It's okay," Neymar said simply. "It happens." The other passengers were now openly watching. Some tried to hold back laughter. Others shook their heads at Javier. Javier knew he had made a huge mistake. Desperate to fix it, he quickly forced a smile. "Neymar, I'm actually a big football fan," he said. "I just didn't recognize you. Without the cameras and your uniform, you know how it is." He laughed awkwardly. Neymar smirked and took a sip of his orange juice. He knew fake admiration when he saw it. The flight attendant smiled at Neymar again. "Mr. Neymar, if you need anything, just let us know," she said. "It's an honor to have you on board." Javier closed his eyes for a moment. He had messed up badly. Behind them, a young man named Diego Navarro had been recording the conversation on his phone. He smiled and quickly typed the caption. "Rich businessman insults Neymar on a plane and regrets it when he finds out who he is." He posted it online, and within minutes, phones all over the plane started buzzing. The video was going viral on Twitter and Instagram. "Wow, it already has thousands of views," Diego whispered to his friend. Javier noticed the murmuring. He pulled out his phone, opened Twitter, and his heart sank. His name was trending. People were laughing at him. Who is this rude businessman who disrespected Neymar? Javier Montoya thinks he's better than everyone, but now he looks like a fool. Neymar stayed calm as always. The other guy embarrassed himself. Javier started sweating. His reputation was at risk. He turned to Neymar with a nervous smile. "Neymar, my friend, please forgive me," he said. "I didn't mean to be rude. It was just a misunderstanding." Neymar looked at him and gave a small smile. "I wasn't even angry," Neymar said. "You were just being honest about how you feel about players like me." Javier panicked. "Look, we can take a picture together," he suggested. "That way people will see we're fine." Neymar let out a short laugh. "No need, brother. I think you've had enough attention for today." Javier turned pale. His last hope was gone. Meanwhile, social media continued exploding and his name kept trending, for all the wrong reasons. Javier unlocked his phone and tried to open Instagram. He wanted to see if he could post something to fix this mess, or maybe delete something before it got worse. But before he could do anything, his phone was flooded with notifications. They kept coming one after another, like an unstoppable storm. On Twitter, things were even worse. Journalists, influencers, and sports pages had already started talking about what had happened. The video was spreading like wildfire. Some of the headlines read, "Spanish businessman disrespects Neymar and gets humiliated. Neymar teaches a lesson in class and leaves the arrogant guy speechless." Javier's face turned ghostly white. He felt a chill run down his spine. His hands trembled as he scrolled through the posts. He needed a solution, and fast. He turned to Neymar, swallowing his pride. "Neymar, please," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You know how the internet is these days." Neymar raised an eyebrow and tilted his head slightly. Was that sarcasm? Was he shifting the pressure back onto Javier? The businessman had no response. He sat there speechless. The airplane cabin was heavy with silence. Some passengers tried to pretend they weren't listening, but it was impossible to ignore what was happening. Then, an elderly man sitting in front of them decided to speak. His name was Manuel Torres. He turned to Javier and in a firm voice said, "You already tried. Now accept it. The problem wasn't the internet exaggerating. The problem was you were the arrogant one." Javier's stomach dropped. This man wasn't some random internet stranger. He was part of the same elite social class, and yet, even he was calling out Javier's behavior. Javier forced a laugh, trying to brush it off. "Look, I think this was all just a misunderstanding, right?" He was desperate to regain control. But Neymar only smiled and shook his head. "Misunderstanding? You made it very clear what you think of people like me. Now deal with it." Javier's mouth went dry. He could feel himself sweating. He turned around, looking at the passenger behind him, Diego Navarro, the one who had recorded and posted the video. "Hey buddy, could you delete that?" Javier asked, his voice almost pleading. Diego let out a chuckle. "Delete it? My friend, this is already everywhere. There's no turning back." Javier's heart pounded in his chest. His mind raced with the possible consequences. His company would get calls. His business partners would question him. His reputation, his carefully built, polished image, was crumbling by the second. And then, as if things weren't already bad enough, Santos FC, Neymar's old football club, posted a tweet that made the situation even worse. "Our boy Neymar has always been a legend on and off the field. Some talk, others play." The post instantly went viral, racking up thousands of likes, retweets, and comments. Javier didn't even have time to process it before Neymar turned to him and delivered the final blow. I've been criticized in every way possible. But at least they criticized me for being myself. You were humiliated because you tried to act superior, and you failed. For a moment there was complete silence. Then the passengers erupted into laughter. Some tried to hold it in, but others laughed freely. Javier felt his entire body tense up. A lump formed in his throat. His cheeks burned with embarrassment. Then, as if to drive the point home, the flight attendant returned, smiling as she addressed Neymar. "Mr. Neymar, if you need anything, we're at your service." Javier shrank in his seat. It was over. There was no fixing this. No damage control. No way out. Neymar, completely unbothered, simply put his headphones back on, opened a new video on his phone, and continued enjoying his flight, as if none of this had ever happened. The flight continued, but for Javier, it felt like a nightmare that wouldn't end. Passengers kept glancing at him, whispering, chuckling. Some sent each other texts probably about him. His phone wouldn't stop vibrating with messages. Some were from business partners asking what had happened. Others were from so-called friends, sending nothing but laughing emojis or clown faces. He tried logging into his social media accounts to see how bad the damage was, but it was even worse than he had imagined. Every post about the incident was gathering tens of thousands of likes and comments. His name was being dragged through the mud. Meanwhile, Neymar was relaxed. He scrolled through his phone, smiled at messages, even laughed at some videos. He wasn't even paying attention to Javier's suffering. Soon, the flight attendant came by to collect dinner trays. She stopped near Neymar and smiled warmly. "It's been a pleasure having you on board, Mr. Neymar. If you need anything, we're at your service." "Thank you, dear," Neymar said with a kind smile. Javier, meanwhile, wished he could disappear. He looked out the window, lost in thought. When did he become like this? When he was younger, he had worked hard to build his success. He had been humble, respectful. Back then, he had never looked down on people. But over the years, he had changed. He had let his wealth and status make him cold. He had started believing he was above others, that he was more important, more powerful. And now the whole world had seen his arrogance, and they were laughing at him. Suddenly, the captain's voice came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into Sao Paulo." Javier looked outside. The city lights sparkled below. A mix of relief and dread filled him. Relief, because the flight was finally ending. Dread, because the real storm was just beginning. Just before landing, Neymar took off his headphones. He looked directly at Javier. "Hey, can I give you some advice?" Javier hesitated. He wasn't sure what to say. "The internet forgets quickly," Neymar said, crossing his arms. "But people don't. You can act like this never happened, or you can learn from it." Javier stared at him, surprised. "Look, I'm not perfect either," Neymar continued. "I've made my own mistakes. But one thing I've learned? When you act like you're better than everyone else, someone will always remind you that you're not." Javier felt a lump in his throat. Neymar didn't need to humiliate him further. He didn't need revenge. The businessman had already lost. "Think about it, brother," Neymar said, putting his headphones back on. The plane landed. Neymar grabbed his carry-on and headed for the exit. As he walked, airline staff and passengers asked for pictures and autographs. Neymar smiled and greeted them all. Javier, on the other hand, stayed in his seat, waiting until most people had left. Before stepping off the plane, he checked Twitter one last time. The video had over 10 million views. The comments were endless. One stood out. "True wealth isn't in your pocket, it's in your attitude." Today, a rich man left this flight as the poorest of all. Javier shivered. He took a deep breath, turned off his phone, and stepped off the plane. He was no longer the same man who had boarded. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories filled with adventure, mystery, and excitement. Your support means the world, and it helps keep these stories coming. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.